Chapter 98. The steward called Wuxia thought of a lad who often appeared in court at the House of Red Sleeves in the 13th year of the Tianqi era. His heart tightened and he looked toward the source of the voice. He saw clearly the face of the person beside the first young master Chu and found that it was the wicked guy who called girls without paying. His body suddenly became stiff and his expression became extremely ugly. He thought bitterly in his heart, since we haven't seen each other for a long time, why should we meet again today? For people in the service industry, their thoughts and behaviors could never be synchronized. Steward Hua kept cursing Ning Kei's parents and ancestors in his heart, but the ugly expression on his face quickly turned into a few bright flowers. He did not dare to hesitate and bowed to that person across several tables. Then, he turned around and put his right hand to his lips, shouting cheerfully toward the quiet and sparsely lit upstairs, ladies upstairs and downstairs. Young Master Ning Kei is here. No one knew how many people in the building were shocked by this shout. The students who were pretending to be shy and calm or pretending to be proud of themselves all looked at Ning Kei's table in surprise. Situilan held the teacup and opened her mouth in surprise. Jean Wuxia could no longer maintain her gentle expression and thought to herself, what kind of reception is this? Why does it seem that everyone in the House of Red Sleeves knows Ning Kei? The students were surprised and expectant. They looked up to the upstairs with curiosity and disbelief. They wanted to see how many girls would poke their heads out to see Steward Hua after his shout. The music on the balcony had stopped and it was quiet in the building. There were no beauties who could not wait to look at Ning Kei, no girls who smiled and waved to him, and even no maidservants who came to check on the situation for their mistress appeared. Just when the expectant students were a little disappointed, some felt a little balanced, and Situilan felt a little bored, suddenly there was a dense sound of footsteps in and behind the building. Just like big and small pearls falling on a jade plate, or like heavy rain and light rain playing in the spring breeze pavilion, in the sound of footsteps, beads swaying, and orioles singing and swallows talking, 6 or 7 girls from the backyard of the building came out in a line with their personal maidservants. They gathered in the hall like flowing water, and then came to Ning Kei's side. Some of them blamed him for not coming for a few days, some of them gently cared why he did not come these days, and some of them frowned and wondered if something had happened to him. In short, it was very lively. While they were busy, a little girl with a cute pair of hair poked out from the top floor. She was Mistress Jian's personal maidservant, Xiaofan. Her dark eyes rolled around, but she didn't see the person she wanted to see. She shouted unhappily, Ning Kei, why isn't Sang Sang here? You shut her up in the shop again. That night, the bored girls in the House of Red Sleeves who were preparing to go to the palace to practice singing and dancing. They ridiculed and hurt the fragile and sensitive heart of a young man, and pushed Ning Kei into the building. After that night, things began to change subtly. Whether it was Dewdrop or Lu Shui, or those ordinary girls, they all treated Ning Kei very warmly and cordially. There were only 3 reasons. First, Ning Kei had a clean and pleasant face, and was a rare young man in the brothel. He spoke well, behaved in a cute manner, and respected the girls. Moreover, they didn't have that kind of relationship, so they got along with each other easily and became very familiar with each other. Second, Dewdrop doted on this guy because of some purely personal reasons, so the girls of the Zhu family naturally gave him more face. The most important reason was naturally that Mistress Jian had once expressed a certain degree of concern for this lad. This concern was not obvious, but it was too rare for Mistress Jian, who had always been indifferent to men and even hated them. Dewdrop and Lu Shui did not care about it, but for the other girls, if they could please Mistress Jian, not to mention being more intimate with Ning Kei, even if they had to sacrifice their bodies for a few nights, it would not be a big deal. However, the academy's classmates didn't know these reasons, nor did they know how many times Ning Kei went in and out of the House of Red Sleeves in this spring. They were already dumbfounded as they looked at the girls around the table and listened to their sweet voices. Situilan finally put down the teacup slowly and closed her mouth. But when she saw Lu Shui, whom she had failed to invite twice, sitting beside Ning Ke and chatting with him while eating melon seeds, she couldn't help but look at Jin Wuxia, who was dressed as a man, and said with a shocked expression, Chu Yuxian didn't lie. Ning Ke really can go anywhere in the House of Red Sleeves. This guy is much more respected than my arrogant cousins. While they were talking, Ning Ke and the girls had finished their greetings and bid farewell to each other warmly. Then he raised his right hand slightly to hold Lu Shui's hand and walked to Situilan's table. He said with a smile, Miss Situ, I've brought Lu Shui here for you. You have to pity her for her hard practice recently and let her go back to rest early. Situilan stood up and pretended to be angry but was actually happy. She said, we girls are talking, it's none of your business. After saying this, she turned around and bowed to Lu Shui. She said very seriously, Sister Lu Shui, I've always wanted to see you and ask you about the middle 3 kicks of the Huxian dance. It's a pleasure to meet you today. I hope you can teach me. Lu Shui slightly frowned. She was indeed a little tired, but she knew it was not a good choice to act like a famous prostitute in front of these noble ladies of Chang'an. Jin Wuxia also stood up and gently tapped the thumb and forefinger of her left hand with the folding fan in her right hand. She said with a smile, Miss Lu Shui, my sister Situ wants to learn the middle 3 kicks of the Huxian dance because it's the 60th birthday of Yunhui General at the end of this year. She wants to present this dance as a gift. It's not necessary for her to learn it today. I just hope you can spare some time for her. I see. Lu Shui smiled faintly and said, then I will dance a little tonight. In the future, if Miss Situ wants to invite me, you only need to inform me of the time in advance. It will be very convenient whether you come or I go to your residence. The Hu dance had nothing to do with the grassland barbarians, but came from the Yueluan kingdom. It was said that its origin was the sacrificial dance of a rainforest tribe in the extreme west of the Yueluan kingdom. It was famous for its lively rhythm, especially when the upper part of the dancer's body was still like a fairy scattering flowers, while the lower part was shaking rapidly. The waist, abdomen, and thighs were dancing with the song, which would form a very sharp contrast of beauty. This kind of dance was extremely difficult. The lower 3 kicks were relatively easy to achieve, but it was extremely difficult to complete the middle 3 kicks or even the upper 3 kicks while keeping the upper part of the upper body modestly still. The best Hu dance girl in the world was in Chang and of the Tang Empire, in the House of Red Sleeves. She was Lu Shui. In the sound of the pipa, there was a faint flute fluttering. The lights in the quiet building dimmed slightly. When the curtain was lifted, Lu Shui, who was wearing a gauze dance gown that exposed her abdomen and wrapped around her buttocks, walked in. Her eyes were gentle and her hands were clasped in front of her white breasts. Neither her fingertips nor her eyelashes trembled. However, her bare snow-like feet were slowly dancing to the music. Especially as the pipa became more and more urgent, the frequency of her feet stepping on the stage became faster and faster. Her thighs and buttocks tightly wrapped by the gauze dance gown kept shaking like lightning, and her exposed abdomen swayed with fine lines. After the dance, countless cheers rang out, and then the building returned to a warm and lively atmosphere. Situilan seriously toasted Lu Shui, and everyone casually said a few words. Lu Shui, who looked tired, gently apologized and went back to her own yard to rest. Hu Xian was the best accompaniment to wine. Tonight, there were more than 20 young students in the House of Red Sleeves, who were in the middle of their youth. Immediately, the wine went down quickly. The elegant sound of Meng Shu's drinking was mixed with the sound of chips being tossed. The hall was lively and cheerful. Tonight, Ning Ke had been pushed into the limelight by Chu Yuxian and the manager of the brothel. Naturally, he became the center of the drinking scene. Regardless of whether they were familiar with each other or not, the students all went up to him and tried to persuade him for various reasons. In the beginning, they would still play drinking games and play drinking games. But when they realized that Ning Kai was really a genius at playing drinking games and playing drinking games, and after he won more than 10 rounds, the drinking games became drinking games. Ning Kai liked to drink, and he liked the taste of wine even more. These years, he had been drinking with Sang Sang. But it was a pity or sad that after drinking for so many years, his capacity for liquor did not increase at all. Basically, he was still in the state of looking at the wine and drinking games, but because he was too drunk, he basically had no chance to do so. After being urged by his classmates to drink 5 or 6 glasses of wine, he became anxious. His drunkenness, which was only 7%, suddenly jumped to 12%. He forced his eyes open, trying to pretend that he was still sober to scare off his enemies. However, his already inarticulate speech revealed his weak confidence. So he wanted to hug the full moon to pretend to be lonely and hide from drinking, but found that there was still no moon in the night sky. He wanted to lean against the railing and pour wine into the lake to get drunk and recite poems to pretend to be desperate, but found that he could not walk to the railing and could not remember any poems. No matter in the previous life or this life. He did not know when the table he was sitting at was moved to the railing at the back of the building, just close to the small pond of wet bamboo. But he was already paralyzed on the edge of the table, and had long forgotten what he had planned to do. The environment by the railing was much quieter than in the hall. Situilan sat beside him with her right foot on the railing, squinting at the stars in the sky. Her right hand was holding a small pot of clear jade house snow, gently shaking it outside the railing. Obviously, this noblewoman's capacity for liquor was much better than Ning Kai's. The luster in her eyes was very bright. She suddenly asked, "Ning Kai, how did you and Sister Princess meet?" Ning Kai raised his head and rubbed between his eyebrows. Then he raised his chopsticks and kept looking for the cabbage head in vinegar. He casually answered, "I met her on the road." "How did you meet her on the road?" Situilan turned her head and stared at him with interest. Ning Kai inserted his chopsticks into the small pastry, covered his forehead and said angrily, "I picked her up on the road, so we met." Situilan said helplessly, "I think you probably remembered something wrong. Her Highness couldn't have been picked up by you on the road." Ning Kai smiled with drunkenness, "Indeed I remembered wrong. All the things I picked up on the road are treasures. I can't be an idiot. Where did I meet the princess?" "Oh yes, you know I'm a soldier of the city of Wei." Chapter 99. Is the city of Wei very far? Very close to Kaiping. Where is Kaiping? Very close to the city of Wei. Well, I know it's in the frontier fortress. But before that, where were you, Ning Kai? In the mountain. Which mountain? Min Mountain. Is Min Mountain very big? Of course. What about before Min Mountain? What about before? Well, I was young then, so I don't remember much. I only know that I was an orphan. The drunken conversation by the side of the bar could not continue because of Ning Kai's slurred speech and his stubborn mind. Situilan picked up a wet towel and wiped her forehead. She glared at the drunk lad on the table and thought to herself, "What the hell is going on?" Just at this moment, Dewdrop, who had to leave midway, came and diluted the awkwardness. She frowned at the back of Ning Kai's head and could not help but shake her head. She helped him up and put a wet towel on his forehead. Then she smiled at Situilan and said in a hoarse voice, "Miss Situ, he can't hold his liquor well." Before Situilan could open her mouth to ridicule him, Ning Kai, who was lying in Dewdrop's arms, woke up. His mind was in a blur, and he vaguely felt that his face was pressed against a slightly cool, moist, and plump place. Subconsciously or instinctively, he held her waist tightly with both hands and pressed his face closer to her, even rubbing against it. Dewdrop's plump bosom was squeezed out of shape by the young man's bad taste. Her delicate and pretty little face showed a rare hint of charming shyness, and there were a few blushes on it. Situilan looked at Ning Ke squinting in Dewdrop's arms. She watched him put his hands into the girl's sleeves and then move to somewhere. She could not help but raise her head and cover her forehead in annoyance. She also covered her eyes. After all, she was a noble lady of the Yunhui general's mansion in Chang'an. Seeking pleasure in the brothel was just a matter of elegance. When had she ever seen someone actually dared to do indecent things in front of her? Of course, she knew that Ning Ke had drunk too much at this time. He was so drunk that he might not even be able to tell whether he was hugging a waist or a willow, rubbing a chest or a big steamed bun. But for an unmarried girl, even one who was famous for being bold and unrestrained in Chang'an City, this scene was really unbearable. She stood up in embarrassment and anger, pulled Ning Ke up, and continued to pour wine into his mouth. Ning Ke vaguely felt that someone was trying to force him to drink more wine. How could he allow that to happen? He hugged Dewdrop's waist tightly and refused to let go. His palm slid down her lapel and kept rubbing the girl's soft and plump abdomen. He kept muttering nonsense like, "This is better than drinking wine," and, "I won't drink any more." Dewdrop giggled as he touched her. She hurriedly lifted her sleeve to cover her lips and said with an annoyed smile, "You'll have to pay if you touch me again." Ning Ke lowered himself in her arms and answered in a daze, "Your brother is now a man with a net worth of 2,000 taels of silver. Do I still need this little bit of silver? If a monk can touch you, why can't I touch you? So what if we spend a spring together?" Dewdrop was a little annoyed when she heard this, but she was confused when she heard the word monk. She raised her head and looked at Situilan for help. Situilan spread out her hands and said angrily, "How would I know what nonsense you are talking about?" Then she used a little strength to grab the front of Ning Ke's lapel and forcibly lifted him up. She got close to his face and said loudly, "You've drunk too much. Go back quickly. Don't tell me there's no one waiting for you at home." No one knew whether it was because he had been blown by the night wind for a long time, or because Situilan shook him hard, or some key words in this sentence that touched the sensitive soul in Ning Ke's mind. He suddenly stiffened and slowly woke up. He opened his dull eyes and looked at the night view outside the fence and murmured, "Yes, there's someone waiting for me at home." Situilan and Dewdrop looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. They were not concerned about where Ning Ke got the 2,000 taels of silver from. What they were happy about was that the two of them finally did not have to accompany this young master who suddenly became rich from the poor to go crazy. However, to their surprise, Ning Ke stood up shakily, broke away from Situilan's hand and gently avoided her. Dewdrop, who wanted to help him, staggered into the building. She grabbed a writing brush from the accountant's office and tore a page of the account book. Xiaofan leaned against the table and wrote some numbers in cursive with drunken eyes. Then he said, "Send it back to Lin 47th Street for me." Dewdrop moved closer to take a look and saw a few words scribbled on the account book. The frame of the words was crooked and scattered, and the white strands were unclear. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to tell what was written. "Young Master Sang, I'm drunk today, so I won't come back to sleep. Remember to drink the chicken soup left in the pot." Ning Ke was a man who looked gentle on the outside but was extremely calm and self-controlled in his bones. He knew very well that he could not hold his liquor, so he rarely lost control of himself after drinking too much except when he was drinking with Sang. However, the situation was a little different this time. He was so happy today that he felt depressed without any alcohol to liven things up. This joy that came from the bottom of his heart had nothing to do with the endless nights in the brothel, nor did it have anything to do with his classmates from the academy taking advantage of their youth. It was purely because he saw the message on the thin piece of paper in the old library. In the warm afternoon sunshine, he vaguely saw the direction of the door to the wonderful world. After more than 10 years of desperate searching, he finally saw a glimmer of hope. What else in the world could be more suitable than this, and what else could be more suitable than this? What else could be more suitable than this? What else could be more suitable than this? Dewdrop saw his cute drunken look and could not help laughing. She held his left arm and shook her head, saying, "Don't drink any more. I'll ask the carriage company to send you home later." Ning Ke gently held her hand. His palm was slightly wet with sweat. Only then did he realize that the saying of being drunk made sense. He slightly narrowed his eyes to hide his nervousness and pretended to be calm, saying, "I won't go back tonight. It's not good for you to drink and have fun with your classmates." Dewdrop smiled and teased, "Where's the elegance?" Ning Ke said under the influence of the liquor, "I'm just a little soldier who was sent here. How would I know what elegance is? My good sister, how about letting me be vulgar tonight? Don't pretend to be crazy when you're drunk. You'll regret it when you wake up." Dewdrop laughed and said, "If you're sober on normal days, let alone once, I can even let you be vulgar 3 times. So what?" Ning Ke squinted his drunk eyes and waved his hand repeatedly. He said with a silly smile, "That won't do. That would be the 3 vulgarities. I can't listen to this nonsense anymore." Situilan frowned and covered her forehead to suppress the rolling drunkenness in her stomach. She said, "Ning Ke, if you want to fool around, can't you pick another day?" Ning Ke reluctantly stood up and bowed deeply. He said, "Miss Situ, this is the place you picked. If it were another day, I really wouldn't have the guts to accompany a girl to a brothel." Situilan was speechless for a moment. She glared at him and thought, "You still know that you're accompanying a girl to a brothel? Then why don't we just listen to some songs, watch some dance, and talk about art and life? Why do we have to do this?" Fortunately, she did not say this out loud. Otherwise, Ning Ke would have ridiculed her for a long time about the difference between artistic young girls and normal young girls. Dewdrop smiled and looked at Ning Quebec. She said sympathetically, "Ning Ke, you seem to have forgotten one thing. Mistress Jian has said that no one is allowed to entertain you. Where can you go?" As soon as Dewdrop finished her words, an arrogant and indifferent little maidservant appeared in front of everyone with a bowl of fish-tail soup. She was Mistress Jian's personal maidservant, Xiao Chao. She stared at Ning Ke's eyes coldly and said, "Mistress Jian has said that no one is allowed to let him drink it. Ning Ke, you drink this bowl of soup and immediately take a bath to get rid of the stench on you. Then, follow me upstairs. Mistress Jian has something to ask you." In novels, there was a common sentence to describe the behavior of a master, and that was, "It takes a long time to say it, but it happens in the blink of an eye." The maidservant Xiao Chao appeared just like this, and her words were also very effective. As soon as she said this, those eager academy students were stopped by the girls around them. Ning Ke even let go of the flagon dejectedly. The whole hall was silent. When Ning Ke went to wash up, the academy students in the building inevitably talked about what had happened earlier. Especially those Chang and students who knew Mistress Jian's identity, they could not help but talk about some secrets in the palace and a certain legend of the Tang Empire. Therefore, everyone was more curious about what had happened earlier. It was still quiet beside the railing. Situilan and Jean Wuxia whispered a few words to each other before walking over again. She stood not far from Dewdrop and looked curiously at this outstanding figure in the brothel in the capital city. She asked softly, "Even if Ning Ke was lucky enough to catch Mistress Jian's attention, no matter you or Lu Shui, with your current status, you don't need to deliberately curry favor with him. Therefore, I'm very curious about why. It's interesting that Ning Ke was tricked into this brothel." That night, Mistress Jian made it clear that the girls in this brothel are not allowed to serve him. It's okay for other brothels in Chang'an, but none of the girls in this brothel dare to disobey Mistress Jian's order. However, he still comes here often. What does this mean? Dewdrop's eyes moved and she replied softly with a smile, "This means that the young man comes here to chat with us girls, and we, in fact, really want to chat with him. Situilan supported her chin with her hand and leaned against the railing thoughtfully. Dewdrop smiled and continued, we like to chat with him because we can't just chat with him in our daily chats. We always have to think about how to make those censors happy and vice ministers happy. And Ning Ke likes to chat with us because he has pressure in his bones and needs to chat to relax. Now it seems that he can only really relax by chatting with girls like us in a place like this. Situilan frowned and her eyes were filled with the curiosity of a young girl. What pressure can he have? I don't know what's wrong with Ning Ke's life, but I know there must be something wrong. Dewdrop gradually stopped smiling and said pitifully, in your eyes, Ning Ke is just a calm and simple lad. He shook his head and replied, anyone who can enter that place is a cultivation genius. But my body can't carry out cultivation at all, so I dare not have any thoughts of entering the second floor. Can't you grow up a little? It's rare for you to enter such a good place like the academy, so you should cherish the opportunity to learn. Don't talk nonsense about being infatuated. Mistress Jian looked at him, frowning and shaking her head. She sighed at his lack of ambition. Years ago, she saw that guy riding a donkey and riding it all the way to the second floor. Now she vaguely associated Ning Ke with that guy in her heart, and inevitably had some thoughts of making up for the regret. She could not help but continue to persuade him, the academy itself is a place to create miracles. But if you don't think miracles can happen, then no one can help you. Ning Ke did not know that senior who rode a little black donkey straight into Chang'an and finally made a name for himself in the world, but eventually disappeared like duckweed in the wind and rain. Naturally, he did not understand why Mistress Jian paid so much attention to a poor boy like him. He knew there must be some reasons behind this attention, but he did not care what those reasons were. In the face of a kind woman's earnest teaching, he was still sincerely grateful. Because he had always lacked this part of his life. In his previous life, the back seat of a bicycle might be another form of care, but he did not like it. In this life, he also had it before he was 4 years old, but it was eventually swallowed by blood. Because he was sincerely grateful, or even moved, Ning Ke answered Mistress Jian's questions carefully and seriously, and his speed was a little slow. But in Mistress Jian's eyes, this made her feel a little annoyed. You and I are neither relatives nor friends. If it were not for the passion in my heart, I would not have bothered to say these words to you. So don't have any negative feelings. I am not doing you any harm by asking you to cherish the opportunity to study in the academy. Mistress Jian looked at him seriously and said, last time I told you that rich young masters like Chu Yuxian can play here, but a poor boy like you is not qualified to play here. Today it is even more so. Chang and noble ladies like Miss Situ and Miss Jean can play here, but you are not qualified to play here. They are close to you because they find you amusing and are temporarily curious about you. This interest is not necessarily malicious, but it is not real respect. If you want to be their real friend, then you must have some ability in bearing that is worthy of their respect. If you can enter the second floor of the academy, I believe that everyone in the world will be willing to be your friend. Mistress Jian picked up the golden orchid dew on the table and took a sip to moisten her throat. Then she looked up at him and continued calmly, in the future, you can come to the brothel to relax, but not too often. You can't drink too much. I am a nanny in the brothel, so I don't think that loitering in the brothel is a lowly behavior, but I also don't think that it is a good thing to do. 30 years ago, the great poet Mr. Chao Ciyuan spent the first half of his life in the brothel, but who dared to disrespect him? He even married the Prime Minister's daughter, but it was not because he had made a name for himself in the brothel, but because his poetry was unparalleled in the world and he was talented. The Tang Empire values talent. As long as you have talent and you are a talent, no matter if you are upstairs or downstairs, inside or outside the brothel, a boy from the border town or a noble in Chang'an, the empire will not bury you. After the lecture, Ning Ke went downstairs with his hand on his forehead and found that the gathering in the hall had ended. After asking the steward in the building, he found out that eldest young Miss Situ was the one who finally paid for the gathering of his classmates. When he heard this news and thought about how he could maintain his 2,000 taels of silver for a while longer, he couldn't help but feel very lucky. When he was about to say goodbye to Dewdrop and the others, the maidservant Xiao Chao, who had received Mistress Jian's order, chased him to the horse carriage and ordered the coachman to send the drunken lad back to Lin 47th Street as fast as possible. Sitting in the galloping horse carriage, Ning Ke felt like dying, drunk, and nauseous. But somehow, his mind was clear and he kept thinking about that serious question: I did not hesitate to destroy my body and spirit to stay in the old library to enter the second floor of the academy. It was because I like it, but also because I want to take revenge and improve my strength. Do I have to add another reason in the future, to be able to roam the brothel? When Ning Ke was lost in his thoughts on the horse carriage, another guest came to Dewdrop's courtyard. As one of the popular girls in the House of Red Sleeves, she had the right to choose and even reject guests to a certain extent, except for regular guests like the censor Zhang Yiqi. But for this guest who just entered the courtyard late at night, she just forcibly wiped away the gloomy expression on her face and forced herself to pour tea for him. Go wash your face. A pretty girl like you can't be as dirty as me. The guest who entered the courtyard late at night was a tall and thin old man wearing an extremely old Taoist robe. His robe was stained with oil stains here and there seemed to be a few leftover rice grains between the lapels of the robe. It was extremely dirty. The tall and thin Taoist's face was not dirty, but there were a few sparse long beards under his chin. His inverted triangular eyes flickered, and his obscene aura was extremely dirty. Dewdrop smiled and followed the maidservant to freshen up. She only knew that this guest was important and was a distinguished guest who was personally invited by Mistress Jian. But she did not know who he was or what kind of business he did. As for external things such as appearance and clothes, they were never the focus of her or the maidservant's attention. What was important was that this Taoist had always been extremely generous. Moreover, he called himself the primordial spirit protector. He had come 2 or 3 times, but he only took action and refused to be serious. There was no reason for the girls in the brothel not to like this kind of guest. The dirty, skinny and tall Taoist poured himself a cup of wine and drank it slowly. Just as he was feeling bored, he saw a crumpled piece of paper beside the wine pot. It was the most ordinary paper for an account book. He could vaguely see the handwriting on it. Based on his habit of cultivating for decades, he instinctively picked up the crumpled paper and carefully spread it on the table. There was a line of ink written on the crumpled paper. The words were unclear, and the frame was crooked and messy, which made it unpleasant to look at. On the paper was written, "Young Master Sang Sang, I'm drunk today and won't be coming back to sleep. Remember to drink the leftover chicken soup on the pot." Looking at these words, the tall and thin Taoist's brows furrowed tightly. But what was surprising was that when he furrowed his brows, he did not show disgust, but surprise and joy. The tall and thin Taoist carefully read the words that looked like a chicken's claw. His eyes finally fell on the word, chicken soup, at the end of the sentence. His right hand, which was as skinny as an old tree trunk, dipped into the wine cup, and then put his fingers on the table and began to copy, stroke by stroke. The wine on his fingers dragged on the mahogany table to form words, which were very similar to the word, chicken soup, written by Ning Ke on the paper. Vaguely, there seemed to be streams of air flowing through the tall and thin Taoist's fingers into the wine, seeping into the depths of the hard mahogany, and then instantly dispersed into countless tiny cyclones and disappeared without a trace. Dewdrop, who was dressing up outside the room, seemed to have sensed something. She looked at the reflection of the sky full of stars in the basin in front of her and was stunned. She did not know why she suddenly felt homesick. She missed the warm home that only existed in her imagination and had never appeared in her life. She missed the taste of her mother's chicken soup that she had never tasted before. Chapter 101. The lanky Taoist dipped his finger in the wine and wrote on the mahogany table. Soon he copied the 29 characters on the account book paper. He put his finger into his dry lips and licked it. Then he put his hands behind his back, lowered his body and put his face close to the table. He carefully continued to examine the paper on the account book paper. As he read, he frowned more and more, shook his head more and more frequently, and looked more and more confused. He murmured, "What kind of writing is this? I've never seen it before. There is no fluctuation of primordial qi, but why is the meaning of the brush so abundant? It's obviously scattered to the point of a mess, but why can it make people suddenly nervous after concentrating on it?" The lanky Taoist shook his head and stood up straight. He walked half a circle in the room and then quickly walked back to the mahogany table. He lowered his head and continued to look at the handwriting on the account book paper. He still frowned and shook his head, saying repeatedly, "It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense." No matter how the three major cultivation sects or countries quarreled with each other, no one dared to disrespect the divine talisman master. That was because there were few cultivators in the world, and the divine talisman master was even rarer. The divine talisman master, who stood between the secular world and the secular cultivation, could create wind and rain and startle ghosts and gods when he wrote. He was too important for cultivation and war, and was an almost non-renewable resource. The Tang Empire was the most powerful country in the world. However, it never had more than 10 divine talisman masters. Most of them had already left the secular world and lived in seclusion in the academy or in the forest. They devoted their remaining life to finding the secrets between the veins of heaven and earth. There were not many divine talisman masters who were still in the world. 2 of the 4 divine talisman masters in the South School of Haotian Taoism were messengers sent to Chang'an by the West Hill Divine Palace to show their power. They did not stay in Chang'an for long, so there were only 2 divine talisman masters in the South School of Haotian Taoism. The lanky priest who visited the House of Red Sleeves at night was one of the 2 divine talisman masters. His name was Yen Sei, the senior brother of Li Qingfeng, the nation master of the Tang Empire, and the High Minister of Offerings of the South School of Haotian Taoism. He was fond of strong wine, beautiful women, and wonderful books. In terms of the art of calligraphy and talisman, he was already one of the top figures in the world. That night when it was raining heavily in the spring rain, he drew a well talisman with the help of the rainwater in the alley and scared Wang Jinglu, the cultivation genius of the Tang Empire, who was known to be invincible below knowing destiny, into a crying fat boy. In addition to all kinds of magical talisman techniques, divine talisman masters were most praised for their wonderful realm and ability of painting on the desk and paper. There was a saying in the world that a great painter could not become a divine talisman master if he did not have the potential for cultivation. However, all divine talisman masters must be great calligraphers or great painters who could leave their names in history. Yen Sei was a divine talisman master who frequented brothels for pleasure. As long as he was willing, he could become a leading figure in the world of calligraphy. But such a figure was so interested in the scribbled handwriting on an account book that he could not understand it even after racking his brains. If the calligraphers of the Tang Empire or the powerhouses in the cultivation world saw this scene, they would definitely be shocked speechless. And they would definitely be very curious about who on earth was this person who could write these words that could make a divine talisman master feel distressed. It was not because Ning Ke had great ability that the dignified divine talisman master Yen Sei, racking his brains, could not understand a piece of cursive handwriting. It was because of various reasons that he happened to be in a certain state of mind when he wrote this note tonight. Today, he was enlightened when he read the books in the old building. He forgot the meaning of the words but remembered their shapes. Feeling happy and enlightened, he went to the brothel with his classmates to drink. In a daze, he randomly picked up the brush pen to write cursive handwriting. Then, he naturally followed the principles that he understood when he read the books in the brothel in the daytime and forgot all the strict rules of writing. Even when he was drunk, he subconsciously scattered all the rules of writing. He twisted the plum blossoms and overturned the grape trellis. But this writing method was different. It wedged the hidden interest of the cultivation method from another stiff and clumsy way. If it was another great calligrapher in Chang'an City who read this cursive handwriting, he would not feel much. But in the eyes of a divine talisman master, he always felt that he had scratched his own itch. It was a secret place on his back that he had not scratched for 60 years. It was a place that he had not scratched in the past 60 years. But once he knew it, it itched to the bone. As for the divine talisman master Yen Sei saying that Ning Kei's cursive handwriting could not be understood, it was not wrong at all. Because Ning Kei did not understand the principles of cultivation, and the snow mountain and ocean of qi acupoints in his body were still blocked. Now he just wanted to find a winding and long path to go up the mountain, but there was still a huge rock at the end of the path. How could he get through? The meaning of the words meant that every stroke in the middle and the following strokes contained the intention and thought of the calligrapher at that time. Ning Kei's cursive handwriting of 29 words could be said to be incomprehensible. That was because he could not understand it, so the meaning was trapped in the ink and could not be penetrated. But now that the dignified divine talisman master Yen Sei had copied it, no matter how powerful Tao Qi was, he could no longer imprison the intention in the strokes and words. The wine seeped into the hard mahogany table, and the wine spread to the air and then spread to the whole house of red sleeves. At that time, Ning Kei was drunk when he wrote this to Sang Sang. It seemed that he wanted to express his intention to stay in the house of red sleeves for the night. But when the true meaning hidden in the ink was fully released, it revealed his true intention. He did not think that was his intention, or he was not willing to admit it. In the courtyard of a few plum trees in the west, Lu Shui was silent with a long flute in her arms. Her beautiful and haggard face was full of sorrow. Looking at the old plum trees in the corner of the courtyard, she missed the spring in her hometown in the south. In the courtyard of a few bamboo trees in the east, Dewdrop stared blankly at the basin full of stars. Bright tears rolled down her smooth cheeks like pearls and fell into the basin, making a soft sound. In the quiet room on the top floor, behind the bead curtain, Mistress Jian looked at the portrait beside the bed. Her broad forehead wrinkled into a deep frown. She looked at the young scholar riding a black donkey in the portrait. She looked at his familiar raised eyebrows and looked at his spirited and even arrogant laughter. Tears slowly flowed down her face. She murmured in a low voice, "Kuharan, you bastard. I made chicken soup for you every day when you came back, but you didn't come. Now, even if you wanted to drink it, you can't. I don't know, how are you living in the underground?" Suddenly, she raised her eyebrows and woke up with a tight grip on the silk handkerchief in her hand. She hurried to the railing and looked at the courtyard downstairs. She knew the identity of the thin and tall Taoist in Dewdrop's courtyard, but she was not afraid at all. She scolded softly with an angry face, "You old man, you are so unreasonable. Why did you come to my house to provoke me? Why did you think of that bastard?" In the courtyard, Dewdrop, who had washed her face and put on some light makeup, walked back to the room leisurely. When she saw the tall and thin Taoist shaking his head by the table, she couldn't help but be slightly startled. She walked up to him and took a look. She frowned and asked doubtfully, "Sir, why did I smell chicken soup earlier?" "It's not the smell of chicken soup. It's the smell of going home." The divine talisman master Yen Sei shook his head and pointed at the 29 characters scribbled in ink on the account book. He said, "When this man wrote this note, he was very anxious to go home and drink the leftover chicken soup. The chicken soup may not be delicious. I'm just curious about Sang Sang, who should be a woman. I don't know whether she is his fierce wife or strict mother. How could she force him to be like this? Isn't this note written by Ning Ke? Dewdrop's delicate face was full of confusion. He didn't look like he wanted to go home at that time. Sang Sang is not his wife, but his little handmaiden. Little handmaiden? That's even more unreasonable. The divine talisman master Yen Sei shook his head and no longer cared about this matter. He had never married in his life because he had seen too many fierce wives like tigers in the Tang Empire, especially in Chang'an. He only wanted to linger in the bushes of flowers and taste fresh food all day long. Therefore, he could not understand why a little handmaiden and a bowl of leftover chicken soup were worth so much of his attention. The next morning, the thin and tall Taoist left in a carriage without asking who the person who wrote the 29 characters was. After a while, Dewdrop walked over while yawning and rubbing her sleepy eyes. She had long forgotten all the emotions from last night. She took a sip of the hot tea served by the maidservant and subconsciously glanced at the table. She found that the tattered account book and notepad had disappeared, and the 29 cursive characters that the lanky Taoist had copied on the mahogany table with his finger had long dried up and disappeared. She shook her head with a smile and put down the teacup in her hand. The emerald bracelet on her wrist gently knocked on the mahogany table. A very light sound was heard, and a very fine red paint powder was shaken off the table. Dewdrop was slightly shocked and opened her eyes to look at it curiously. After a moment of hesitation, she gently wiped it with the silk handkerchief in her sleeve. Under the red paint powder was a row of extremely sloppy handwriting. These handwriting did not seem to be deep, but the traces were so deep in the wood that it could not be erased. It could be said that the handwriting had penetrated deep into the wood. Young Master Sang Sang, I'm drunk today, so I won't come back to sleep. Remember to drink the remaining chicken soup in the pot. Dewdrop opened her eyes and stared at the scribbled handwriting on the mahogany table. She vaguely understood something. She did not know that the skinny and tall Taoist was the legendary divine talisman master, nor could she see how great karma Ning Ke would have in the future. However, she knew that the skinny and tall Taoist must have an extraordinary background. She sincerely hoped that Ning Ke would have a great karma Ning Ke would have in the future. More importantly, she had a natural sensitivity to opportunities after having seen countless people. Thus, she immediately ordered the maidservant to carefully put away the table and keep it safe for the future. On the other side, the divine talisman master Yen Sei went out of the brothel and boarded a shabby carriage. After a short journey in Chang'an City, he met a young Taoist with a yellow paper umbrella under his armpit. The young Taoist respectfully replied, "Uncle, I've found out what you asked me to do. That person is called Ning Ke, and he escorted the princess. Liu Qingchen has seen him and confirmed that he has no potential. I've also seen him in the academy a few days ago, but he did not even enter the course of magic skills." The divine talisman master sighed with pity. Not to mention the relationship between the lad and her highness, it was already a hopeless situation that he could not open all his acupoints. Did he have to ask the West Hill Divine Palace to gather the power of several great divine priests to help this lad open his acupoints by force? It was hard to find a successor for the wonderful talisman technique. Last night, he finally met one, but he was congenitally deficient. What a pity. Chapter 102. Ning Ke did not know that he had once again passed by a great lucky chance, nor did he know that he tore a piece of account book paper in the brothel and was seen by a divine talisman master, which led to the creation of the two famous chicken soup calligraphy and the woodcut rubbings of the Yen family. Now he was still the unknown young boss of the Lin 47th Street, the ordinary student who studied hard in the academy. When he woke up the next morning, he frowned and drank the bowl of chicken soup with great difficulty. Then he stopped Sang Sang, who was about to clean up the stove. Looking at the little handmaiden's black face, he said very seriously, "I drank too much last night because I was too happy." But I got drunk when I came back, so I didn't have time to tell you. Sang Sang raised her little face, raised her thin eyebrows, and looked at him curiously with her bright eyes. She asked, "Young master, what made you so happy? I really rarely see you drink so much. In the old library of the academy, I seem to have found a way to understand those books." Ning Ke smiled and held out a finger, shaking it in front of her little nose. He said, "Although it may only be a glimmer of hope, it is still hope. I think if possible, I must seize it." The so-called hope was just an occasional denial of despair. Because it was only occasionally, it could not last long. As a guy who had been toyed with by fate for more than 10 years, Ning Ke knew better than anyone else that the end of hope would often turn into disappointment and then despair. The greater the hope, the deeper the regret in the end. Whether it was the cultivator in the mountains of the Yen territory, the examination officer of the military ministry, the gentle old man Liu Qingchen on the journey, or the magic skills selection of the academy, he had endured the painful process of hope being extinguished again and again. So he became calmer and even more numb. Even so, he seemed not to care much about stepping into that magical world of cultivation, but deep in his heart, he had never given up hope. Because he knew that if he wanted to survive in this world, to live well, to complete his revenge, to write his name on the fertile black soil of the Great Tang, he had to enter that world. If he gave up all hope, then the result would not be disappointment, but despair. In order to grasp the faint glimmer of hope, Ning Ke adjusted his mental state to the most passionate and sunny state. Every morning, he would leave Chang'an City by car before dawn and return to Lin 47th Street in the middle of the night. In the morning, he would often feel sleepy when he studied the 6 classics. When the bell rang for the 3rd time, he would jump up energetically as if he had been choked by Nandanese tobacco. He would rush out of the study room and into the kitchen. He would chew the lunch for 2 slowly and take a few laps around the lake. Then, he would climb the stairs again and again, holding the book in his hand. Under the sun, he read the ink characters under the west window. He used the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to disassemble all the characters in the thin book into individual strokes. Then, he would carefully experience the direction and meaning of those strokes and deliberately forget their meaning. The female professor was still quietly writing the hairpin-style small regular script by the east window. He did not know when she untied her hair bun, but the soft short hair above her ears reflected the growing spring scenery outside the window. She was extremely gentle and also extremely silent. No matter how sincere Ning Ke's attitude was, she refused to give any advice. After a few days in the afternoon, he finally flipped to the middle part of the book, a preliminary exploration of Ocean of Qi and Mountain of Snow. The ink characters reflected in his eyes were disassembled into thousands of strokes, and then reassembled into thousands of different shapes and inexplicable meanings of Yong. It almost completely exhausted his mental and physical strength. Ning Ke rubbed his sore eyes and silently turned his head to look at the increasingly fat green leaves outside the window. He knew that it was meaningless to force himself to continue reading. Even if he continued to squeeze out the last of his mental perseverance, it would only help him to understand more about the meaning of the talisman master who copied the book. It would not provide any help to him to step into the initial state. What disappointed him the most was that on the piece of paper in the middle of the thin book, there were no more notes left behind by that mysterious teacher. There wasn't even a word or two, as if that person had disappeared. The cicadas that had troubled the students of the academy for thousands of years began their cycle of reincarnation without warning in this afternoon. Ning Ke quietly listened to the noisy cicadas outside the window. After a long time, he suddenly turned his head and closed the thin book on his knees. Then, he closed his eyes and began to meditate. He used the 8 strokes calligraphy method of Yong to compose the meaning of the strokes, and then forcibly dispersed his mind to forget the meaning of the words. Therefore, although there were many strokes and they could barely stay in a corner of the spiritual world, once he began to meditate on these strokes, the complicated strokes would become dangerous. On the first day, when Ning Ke felt that the psyche power in his chest and abdomen had no way forward, he knew that it would be very dangerous to forcibly meditate on it. Therefore, he did not try it again these days. He only hoped that it was right in front of him in the human world. If he watched it slip away to the netherworld and the horizon, it was absolutely unacceptable to him. Therefore, he had to try again at this moment. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged by the window, motionless for a long time like a statue. A warm spring breeze blew in from the west window and blew on his light green robe, causing ripples. Those traces slowly protruded on the surface of the green robe outside his chest and abdomen, and then calmed down. They protruded again and calmed down again, as if they had some kind of spirituality, or as if some wonderful life had come to life. It was a pity that those traces could not be connected after all. They were isolated in a corner and could not be touched no matter which direction they went. Their spirituality was blocked and life had no foundation. In a small pond in the academy, the lake water was gently disturbed by the wind, and the slight waves pushed a few small round duckweed on the surface to swing around. But no matter which direction the duckweed swayed to, it would eventually touch the wall of the pond and fall back. In a deep mountain somewhere in the world, a famous scholar went through the dense forest to visit a famous monastery. He knocked on the wooden door of a small temple, only to find that the great virtue-eminent monk had already traveled around the world. The famous scholar could only shake his head and climb up the stairs to retreat. He looked back at the broken road in the forest, feeling very resentful. In Ning Ke's spiritual world at this moment, those extremely complicated strokes, those partial radicals that had been decomposed into no specific meaning, and those horizontal and vertical lines and ink spots, suddenly became vivid as he tried to meditate on them. The ink marks had sharp metal edges and became the frightening saber array of the golden tribe of the barbarians on the grassland. The tip of the brush was infinitely wet and became the cold rain outside the spring breeze pavilion. It began to fall. When it fell, countless heads were chopped off, and when it fell, it became a rainstorm. It was majestic and endless, only endless conflicts. All of a sudden, the whole world stopped. He suddenly opened his eyes and left the state of meditation. He felt a sharp pain in his chest and could not help but lower his head to cough. The slightly hoarse cough instantly broke the silence on the second floor of the old library. He hurriedly lifted his sleeve to cover his mouth, only to find that the sleeve was stained with some scarlet blood spots. The headmaster of the academy once said that doing things by force is a very boring thing. Your body is not suitable for cultivation. Although you have amazing perseverance and even found a very interesting way, but, since it is impossible, don't persist. Unknowingly, the female professor had already walked to Ning Ke and said softly while looking at him with gentle eyes. Ning Ke looked up and found that the female professor was extremely small, with thin eyebrows and clear eyes. He could not tell how old she was. He knew that in the previous dangerous moment, she must have used some method to forcibly call him out of meditation. He could not help laughing at himself, stood up, wiped the blood stains on the corner of his mouth, and sincerely bowed to her. The female professor smiled and shook her head, indicating that he did not need to be so serious. After slightly nodding, she walked to the depth of the bookshelf with the hairpin-style small regular script, and somehow got out of the old library. Unconsciously, Ning Ke spent a lot of time meditating. It was already dusk outside the building. When the night was about to come, he did not hurry to leave, but quietly stood under the west window, listening to the intermittent chirping of cicadas due to lack of practice. Then he walked to the desk, ground the ink, and wrote a paragraph on the paper. Late at night, the talisman on the bookshelf in the depth of the second floor of the old library shone again, and then quietly slid to both sides. Accompanied by heavy gasps, Chen Pipi squeezed out with great difficulty, and his fat face was very funny with trembling flesh. After leaving those words that night, he had been concerned about Ning Kei's progress. However, because Ning Kei had asked for sick leave, he did not get a reply for several days, which made him angry and more curious. Unfortunately, second brother, who had given him the most headache and fear these days, suddenly asked his classmates to collectively learn the ancient ritual procedures. Under the continuous bombardment of fatigue, he had no time and energy to come over. Finally, Chen Pipi had some free time today. Without taking a bath and resting, he hurried to the old library, just to see if there was any reply from the poor and hateful guy. Walking to the bookshelf, Chen Pipi took out the thin primary exploration of Ocean of Qi and Mountain of Snow. He raised his thick eyebrows and made a slight sound. After reading it for a while, he could not help but shake his head and praise, "This guy is really bold and ambitious. He actually came up with such a stupid method, and can actually understand it?" What he read was naturally Ning Kei's first reply, and then he saw Ning Kei's latest message today. His thick lips could not help but smack more loudly. He frowned and said in distress, "You don't even know this, and you still want to play cultivation? I really don't know whether you are a genius or an idiot." After a moment of silence, Chen Pipi sat at the desk by the west window, ground the ink, and began to reply. In the second exchange between him and Ning Kei, this genius student from West Hill wrote, "Are you a child? Don't you even know such a basic truth? Since you don't know anything, you naturally can't resonate with the breath of heaven and earth. There is no other way. If you want to know the specific reason, I can only give you an analogy. Our body is like a musical instrument, such as a flute. Psyche power is the breath of heaven and earth in the flute. Beautiful music can't be played with the flute and the breath, because the sound comes from the holes of the flute. If there are no holes on your flute, how can you play? Heaven and earth can't hear your music, how can you sense it? There are so many acupoints in your Ocean of Qi and Mountain of Snow that are blocked. How do you still want to play? The computer network of the Austrian hotel is as bad as that of the German hotel. I tried my best to write it last night, but I just couldn't send it. Fortunately, I can now. Also, dear readers, it's going to be a long-distance flight back home soon. If I can write it on the plane, I won't stop updating tomorrow. If I can't write it on the plane, it will be terrible. I will confirm whether there is an update before 8:00 on the 19th and report to you by then. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. He probably knew that he could still recite this extremely long denunciation after 40 years, but it was not suitable for him to use this standard to ask his students. When the bell rang for the third time, Ning Kei finally felt relieved. He hastily packed his stationery and books and rushed out of classroom 3. He crossed the clear alley and stepped on the stone path along the edge of the wetland to the old library. Now that he used the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to read books and forget the meaning, it was no longer like before when he would faint while reading. Therefore, he did not need to be so strict on food and rest. More importantly, he was very curious, or rather, looking forward to the question he left yesterday. He wanted to know how the mysterious messenger would answer. Thump, 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 thump. Ning Kei went upstairs, brushed his clothes with his sleeves, and bowed respectfully to the gentle female professor by the east window. He quickly walked back to the bookshelf, took out the thin book A Preliminary Exploration of Ocean of Qi and Mountain of Snow, and opened it as fast as he could. Pulling out the paper with dense handwriting, Ning Kei suppressed his excitement and looked at it, and then fell into a long silence. Our bodies are like musical instruments. For example, if it's a flute, psyche power is the qi that recovers in the flute. With the flute and the qi, it doesn't mean that beautiful music can be played, because the sound comes from the flute holes. If there are no holes on your flute, how can you play? Heaven and earth can't hear your music, how can you feel it? There are so many acupoints in your ocean of qi and mountain of snow that are blocked. What else do you want to do? Ning Ke looked at the message on the paper and raised his head after a long time. He shook his head and looked at the dense forest outside the window with a helpless smile. Listening to the sound of cicadas outside the window, he let out a very slight sigh and said, "It turns out that this is the truth. It turns out that I am a flute that can't be played." Then he looked down at his chest and abdomen. His eyes fell on the thin green academy uniform, and he imagined the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his flesh and bones under the cloth. He seemed to see a lot of clumsy stone mountains that had no acupoints, no rugged paths, and no sound no matter how the waves beat or how the lake wind blew. The person who can write such words is really a genius. He couldn't help but look at the handwriting on the paper again and silently praised in his heart, using pushing down a woman to talk about the principle of reading books and forgetting the meaning, and then coming up with such a wonderful metaphor of playing a flute. If this person is an instructor, he must be the top instructor in the academy. He also thought of countless sages and sages in martial arts novels. Those fellows whose blocked meridians would be cleared after a nap, those who lost all their power and slept in a tomb for a few years wrapped in unfinished silk, those who became invincible after cutting themselves with a knife and severing their conception and governing vessels, those who turned themselves into a great grandmaster of the one meridian after their meridians were all severed, those who turned themselves into a great grandmaster of the one meridian. If those old guys and little guys could do it, why couldn't he? If those guys could succeed in the end because they all had some kind of stubbornness in their temperament, then would his stubbornness be less than theirs? Determination and arrogance flashed in Ning Ke's clean eyes. He struggled to stand up with the help of the bookshelf and walked to the desk beside the west window. He ground the ink and moistened the brush. He left a message for that guy. "I do understand the importance of impassibility. If Haotian is destined to make me impassibility for the rest of my life, then I have to do it myself." I finally came out before 12 o'clock. What's even better is that this chapter doesn't seem to need any major repairs. Excellent. I'll bow down and go to sleep. The day after tomorrow, it's going to be midnight. Dear, I'm going to die. Oh, dear, if you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. But in specific cases, not everything could be completed perfectly by perseverance alone. Back to the foolish old man who was worshipped as an idol by Ning Ke and many male protagonists. When people questioned him, he said that his children and grandchildren were endless, but the mountain was always there, so one day it would be dug out. This sentence was very refreshing and vigorous, and vaguely in line with the true meaning of the headmaster's question of cutting peach blossoms and drinking wine. The so-called endless. However, the foolish old man didn't know a cruel truth, that was, the mountain would sometimes grow taller. In the next few days, the pen and ink were like swords, stabbing directly into the chest. The Haoran sword, which was disassembled by the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong, was like countless sharp swords, stabbing and stabbing in Ning Ke's body, and poking out countless invisible holes. However, those holes quickly collapsed, leaving no passage at all. In order to forcibly poke through those blocked passages, Ning Ke made great efforts, and his spirit and body were seriously exhausted. He didn't faint again, but with more and more times of meditation and forcibly mobilizing psyche power to break the mountain, his face became paler and paler, his throat became drier and his ears began to buzz, and the pain in his chest and abdomen was enough to kill countless talents like Xie Chengyun. The injured lobe of his lungs began to affect his breathing, and his coughing at night became louder and more hoarse and unpleasant, so Sang Sang slept less and less. Finally, one morning, he spat out a mouthful of blood. After being sent to the medical hall, the doctor looked at the lad with pity as if he was looking at a tuberculosis patient, and then casually prescribed some nourishing medicine, and told him to take a good rest and not to go to the brothel again. After receiving 20 taels of silver, he didn't say anything more. After paying such a big price, the mountain in Ning Kei's body, the humble mountain, and the snow mountain were still there in silence. It was really like watching him dig the mountain, and the mountain collapsed, watching him move the mountain, and the mountain didn't speak a word of contempt. One night, Chen Pipi finally finished the learning task of the ancient ritual and sacrificial process arranged by second brother, and came to the old library in the starlight again. When he opened the thin book and saw the sonorous and powerful declaration left by Ning Kei, he was so shocked that he almost cried out. With his fat lips trembling, he pointed at the words left by Ning Kei, and angrily scolded in a low voice, "Are you really an idiot? In this world, except for the West Hill Divine Palace using the great god's vanquishing skill and asking the light of Haotian to forcefully open people's acupoints, who else can go against heaven and change fate? You actually want to open your own acupoints." That was because he believed that he had long passed that age and that it was inappropriate and childish for him to act like that. However, it did not mean that he had the slightest doubt about his own ability. Since childhood, he had been writing all over the school's double roll. From kindergarten's various interest classes to Olympiad math class, he had been invincible in the new China's education system. He was a freak and a good student. He absolutely believed that he was the real genius. So he answered in this way today. There's no need to argue about the lotus and grass, but what I want to say is that if there really is a unique genius in this world, then this genius can only be me, and not you, because only I have the qualifications to be that one and only one. In this case, I have another question. Since you said that Lord Haotian will only pity the real genius, and since I am the real genius, why can't I cultivate? The West Hill Divine Kingdom, which had the most believers, the most unworldly sublime beings, and the most wealth and power, naturally had many geniuses. In the depths of the ruined temple, in front of the 7 tomes of arcane, there were many geniuses. The Tang Academy, which had the most revered status in the world, had the most hermits, and had people like the headmaster of the academy, naturally had many geniuses. Behind several stone statues on the 2nd floor, there were many wise men who lived peacefully. Chen Pipi, who had just lived a short 16 years, had already studied in these 2 places for many years. From the attitude of his teachers and the eyes of his classmates, he had long confirmed that he was the most outstanding genius in the cultivation world. Even if he met the other 2 guys from the unknown place, he still had enough capital to be proud. So he did not think that his usual attitude and message to the guy was too proud, because it was just a simple statement of fact. Now he finally met a guy who was prouder and more confident than him. The problem was that in his opinion, the guy who claimed to be the one and only genius was just a pitiful person who didn't even know what cultivation was. He only had some perseverance and tricks. Well, Chen Pipi admitted that the guy was smart and persistent, but what made him compete with him for the word genius? In his anger, he wrote wildly with the help of the dim starlight through the clouds and the angry cicadas outside the window. He gave Ning Kei a question in his message. You use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to break the characters and use such a stupid method to read the book and forget the meaning. I guess the sword aura must have hurt your heart and lungs and you read the Haoran sword. Then let me ask you, how should you treat the heart and lungs? Don't talk about the dirty medicine such as Qian Caozi. I only ask you, how do you boil mugwort and mugwort? How many times do you boil the fire? How to deal with Angelica dahurica and ginkgo? Slice or grind? How to dose red ginseng and brown sugar? How to mix it? When is the green fruit and green wormwood tonic? You answer me. Mugwort and mugwort, Angelica dahurica and white fruit, red ginseng and brown sugar, green fruit and green wormwood? Ning Ke looked at the scribbled messages on the paper and imagined the look of the guy who should be very young when he wrote furiously. He could not help but raise his eyebrows and feel that this matter was really too interesting. It was not surprising that the guy left a question to test him. But he did not expect that the question left by the guy had nothing to do with the 6 subjects of cultivation, such as how many sword styles could be seen when the characters were broken down in the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. Instead, he asked about the way of medicine. In an instant, he understood the intention of the guy. The guy thought that he was a unique genius in cultivation, so it was naturally a little unfair to test him with questions about cultivation. Therefore, he simply chose a question that had nothing to do with the 6 subjects of cultivation. It was a question about how to choose and decoct medicine. The reason why the other party chose this question was very clear, and it was also very proud. The so-called genius was an all-rounder who was well-versed in every field. Using a cultivation question to test you doesn't count as a skill, but using the problems you encountered on your own will be enough to stump you to death. What a prideful fellow. Ning Ke smiled and shook his head, and then his smile suddenly disappeared. Because he really did not know how to solve this question and how to mix and decoct those familiar medicines to cure his lung injury. The doctor in Chang'an City only told him to take good care of himself after receiving 20 taels of silver from Sang Sang. Although he was used to treating wounds with herbs in Min Mountain, he really did not know how to treat his lung injury and how to treat those medicines. Those who are not competitive usually disdain to be competitive. Have you ever seen the young Wang Bo argue with his peers about the different ways to write the Chinese characters? Have you ever seen Lin Jiying at the age of 17 compete with her classmates at the Huagang Art School for a man's affection? But if the young Wang Bo met Gan Luo, or the 17-year-old Lin Jiying met Sun Yaowei, now that Ning Ke met a proud guy who claimed to be a genius and was very likely to be a real genius, he naturally wanted to compete with him. But unfortunately, he really did not know how to answer this question. I really can't answer your question. He replied shamefully on the paper. Then he raised his eyebrows and the freckles on his face lit up. He tightened his right hand holding the brush and wrote on the paper, but to be fair, I also have a question for you. I don't know if you can answer it. 201110232230 modification, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. They thought that second brother, who hid his absolute pride with seriousness, would also use this method to avoid a fight? Thinking of second brother's usual serious behavior, some people wanted to laugh, but immediately raised their hands to cover their mouths, for fear that second brother would hear their laughter. Chen Pipi looked at second brother's gradually disappearing back, and his expression became even uglier. His fat face twitched and undulated, and he ran to the door and cried, "Senior brother. You should at least give me some ideas." At this time, second brother slowly walked out of the stone platform with strict and square steps, like an emperor on the stage. Hearing Chen Pipi's pleading, he didn't look back, but raised his hand impatiently, and angrily rebuked, "I said I won't figure it out, so I won't. I don't know how big the number of this damn problem will be. Not to mention Kaiping Market, even the whole Tang Empire can't put down so many cows. I'm curious about where Haotian's ranch is. Well, I admit that I can't figure out this damn problem, but I don't believe you can, especially when you were 7 years old. Unless you tell me the answer immediately, I will think that you are acting shamelessly. To tell you the truth, acting shamelessly to me in the academy, especially to someone who is angry out of shame today, will cause very serious consequences. This is not a warning, but a friendly reminder." Next to the table by the west window, Ning Ke's right foot stepped on the chair, and his right arm rested on the windowsill, supporting his chin. He read that guy's message with great interest, and his eyebrows raised proudly from time to time. When he saw the 4 words, angry out of shame, he couldn't help laughing out loud, which made the female professor by the east window frown and look at him. Ning Ke hurriedly sat up straight, and then continued to read that guy's message. He didn't know who was the person who was angry out of shame in the message, and thought that it was just an excuse to save face. If he knew that the person who was angered by his Archimedes ox-splitting problem was the legendary second brother of the second floor, he didn't know whether he would laugh more happily or break out in a cold sweat. As for the guy's accusation of acting shamelessly, Ning Ke didn't care at all. As a former problem-solving patient with Stockholm Syndrome, he knew very well the pain and annoyance of looking at a problem and not being able to find the answer. The guy's accusation was nothing more than an urgent need to know the answer. Do you want to know the answer to this problem? It's very simple. First tell me the answer to your medicine decoction problem, and then we will call this a draw. If you are not convinced, we can continue later. Outside the window, the spring scenery was in its last bloom, and the young cicadas were desperately chirping. Ning Ke shook his head and chuckled. Go to the pharmacy tomorrow to get the herbs, and then come back to fix it yourself. Remember, don't let others see it. Sang Sang took it and asked with a frown, why can't others see it? Ning Ke thought of the guy who left him a message in the old library and couldn't help laughing. He said, if I am right, that guy should be a student of the second floor of the academy. This prescription must be an exquisite secret prescription from the second floor. Since you and I have secretly taken advantage of that guy, it is better not to let others know. Note, this question is about Archimedes dividing the cow. Because it is too long, I can't write it all out. If I did, it would be too easy for me to write this chapter. You can find out by searching on Google. My understanding of mathematics is just like Ning Ke's understanding of cultivation. There are many things that I don't understand. If there are any problems, and if there are students who study mathematics, you can just release me like that kind of gas. This is also the first disclaimer of Jiangyi. 201110232441 revised, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 107. People were coming and going downstairs of the old library, but it was quiet upstairs as usual. The books on the shelves were old thread-bound cultivation books, and the thin paper used by academy students was common. A brush, ink, and an inkstone were quietly placed on the table by the west window. The female professor sat quietly under the east window, and the lad sat cross-legged on the floor, thinking hard. Occasionally, he would get up and write a few sentences on the paper, and then put them into the book. At night, another fat lad came quietly, and after seeing the messages, he would go to the west window and write a few sentences or a long speech. Ning Ke and Chen Pipi, who did not know each other's identity, kept communicating by leaving notes. The late spring and early summer quietly slipped away as they wrote and laughed. It was peaceful and beautiful. Brother John Doe, is there any way to make the sword style in the book more gentle? Idiot, if it could be gentle, how could it be called sword style? Besides, the math question about the meadow and the cow yesterday was too weird. What is the relationship between quantity? Idiot, don't call everything you don't understand weird. Besides, is there really no way to open the acupoints? I still don't believe that Master Haotian would be so unfair to a genius like me. There is indeed, but you still shouldn't have any hope. There is only a fine line between a genius and an idiot. Anyone who has such hope, whether he is a genius or not, will become a poor idiot in the end. Besides, I still have to repeat that the math question you asked the day before yesterday was really a bit weird. It was not simple and beautiful. I heard that the devil's doctrine used a different method. They did not seek to resonate with the breath of heaven and earth, but tried to absorb the breath of heaven and earth into the body. There are no acupoints in the body. Can you use this method to step into the path of cultivation? Besides, here is the third math question I gave you. Please try to solve it seriously, and don't always ask for the answer from me. This question is just for beginners. Are you trying to humiliate me? As for the devil's doctrine, I have to warn you. It's okay in the academy, but don't mention it outside. Otherwise, you'll be chased by all the righteous powerhouses in the world. Besides, I have to tell you with a smile that even the devil's doctrine's cultivation method of absorbing heaven and earth into one's body requires all the acupoints to be connected. Only then can the breath of heaven and earth flow into one's body. This is really regrettable. I thought there would be other paths to take. You can think of using the 8 strokes of calligraphy of Jung to solve the characters. You are also a guy who takes an unconventional approach. I am really worried that you will be forced to cultivate the devil's path. So you should not feel sorry, but feel lucky. Otherwise, if you fall into the devil's path, maybe I may have to cut you into 3 halves with my sword in the future. You're right. I feel very disappointed. By the way, we are considered pen pals, right? Why don't you ever ask me who I am? Aren't you curious at all? Don't you think it's a great opportunity to get to know this genius? I have never been curious about other people's affairs. Besides, you have never asked me who I am. Well, who are you? Where are you from? Which dormitory in the academy? Do you have any beautiful sisters at home? My name is Ning Quebec. I come from the city of Wei, classroom 3 of the academy. There is only a little black handmaiden at home. Who are you? Where are you from? You already have a fierce wife and concubine at home. Is that why you hate women so much? My name is Chun Pippi. I come from West Hill. Then, that's it. I heard that a candidate from West Hill got an A+ in 6 subjects 5 years ago. All the instructors of the academy came out to watch, because that was the best result in 100 years. Is that person you? Yes, it is. Do you have a feeling of awe and admiration for me now? I got 3 A+ in 3 subjects, 2 D+ in 2 subjects, and 1 abandoned. It is said that it is also a unique result in the academy in 100 years. In that case, why should I admire you? It's easy to get 3 A+ in 3 subjects. You can get 2 D+ in 2 subjects, and 1 abandoned. It is really a rare and fierce level. You win. I temporarily admit that you are qualified to talk to me as an equal. You are from West Hill. Why did you come to the Tang Empire to study? I come from a big family in West Hill. You can't imagine how big the family business is. You know, a genius like me is destined to inherit the family property when I was born, but the problem is that I have an equally talented elder brother who is just a little bit inferior to me. More importantly, this elder brother has been treating me extremely well since I was very young, taking care of me and doting on me in everything. He has never complained about the elders of the clan deciding to let me inherit the family property. I didn't want to inherit the family business at all. I thought my brother was the best candidate to inherit the family business. But the elders in the family didn't allow me to refuse. The longer I stayed in the West Hill, the better my brother treated me, and the more uncomfortable I felt. So I sneaked out when I was 10 years old. Sneaked out when you were 10 years old. Didn't your elders look for you everywhere? How could they not? Since they couldn't find me, they must have guessed that I was hiding in the academy. What about you? Why did you enter the academy? Why did you work so hard a few days ago? I entered the academy because I wanted to be an official of the empire. Of course, I wanted to cultivate more. As for why I worked so hard, it was because I had a lot of things to do. If I didn't work hard now, I might lose my life in the future. What could be so troublesome? That's because I can't tell you the story, you know. They exchanged notes on the paper beside the west window of the old library. At the beginning, they asked each other about cultivation and mathematics. Gradually, they became curious about each other's lives. As time passed, Ning Ke, who had used the prescription, quickly recovered and stopped coughing. The two young people, who had never met each other, became more and more familiar with each other. As the summer approached, the temperature became higher and higher. The west window had been closed, shrouding the building in darkness. Ning Ke looked at the notes left by that guy these days, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He found a shocking detail. That guy called Chen Pipi said that if his family couldn't find him, they must have guessed that he was hiding in the academy. This indirectly indicated that there was no place in the world that the guy's family couldn't find. Only a sacred and remote place like the academy could make that family afraid. In the West Hill Divine Kingdom, how could there be such a powerful family? He frowned slightly and thought for a moment, but still couldn't figure it out. Then he continued to read. Yesterday afternoon, he had asked if they could meet in the letter for the first time. Now that he was sure that Chen Pipi was on the second floor, he was naturally curious about the reply in the letter. On the paper was someone's handwriting from last night. When you can enter the second floor, you will naturally see me. Ning Ke shook his head and replied with his pen, the problem is, how can I enter the second floor? Hao Tian's unfairness had blocked all the acupoints in the young lad's body. No matter how he tried to read books in a deconstructive way, or to move mountains and dig holes with a fearless spirit, he had never really taken a step forward on the road of cultivation. At this time, looking at the words, second floor, he inevitably felt a little sad. He put down his pen and stood up to look at the quiet bookshelves around him. He laughed at himself and sighed softly, thinking that it was really interesting and boring to stand on the second floor and think about where the second floor was. Suddenly, he frowned slightly. He noticed that there was a shallow scratch on the ground below the bookshelf that was leaning against the mountain wall not far away. The scratch on the dark-colored wooden floor was extremely faint. If one did not look carefully, it would be hard to notice. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke walked over and squatted down to touch it with his fingers, confirming that it should be the result of years of friction. He looked up at the heavy bookshelf, and his fingers that were pressing on the scratch slightly trembled. Chapter 108. Chang'an was a city that had no regrets, except for its summer. In June, the sun was getting brighter and brighter, and the temperature was getting higher and higher. The hot summer air enveloped the streets and alleys. Occasionally, the wind would blow with a disgusting warm breath, wilting the originally green and plump leaves, staining the grapes on the racks purple, bringing out the ice cubes from the houses of the nobles, and pushing open the doors and windows of the commoners. All the doors and windows of the shops along the street of Lin 47th Street were open. Compared to the risk of theft, the risk of dying from heat stroke was obviously more terrifying. The poor manservants and waiters sat on the stone steps and looked around weakly, guarding against the thieves who had also stayed at home to enjoy the cool air. The shopkeepers and the masters moved bamboo chairs and water buckets to an alley behind the street. The alleys were quiet and narrow, shaded by green pagoda trees. There was not much sunlight during the day, and the night wind was much faster because of the narrow alleys, which made people feel relatively cool when it blew on them. All kinds of bamboo beds and small square tables had completely blocked the narrow alleys behind the street. The neighbors were lying on the bamboo beds and chatting lazily, with fruits soaked in well water on the small square tables beside them. There were also those who were used to finding joy in bitterness. They dug into their bowls of oily noodles, the sweat from the chili mixed with the sweat from the stuffy heat. They used the trick of fighting poison with poison to deceive themselves that the night was not that unbearably hot. From time to time, there would be a clear smack in the alleys. It sounded like an adult was educating a naughty child, but in fact, it was just people patting their greasy and sweaty backs with towels soaked in well water. You can't. Do you still want to find someone to warm your feet on such a hot day? The couple in the fake antique shop argued day after day about taking a concubine. The people on Lin 47th Street had long been tired of hearing it, and even began to wonder if it was a kind of flirtation. There was also a back door at the back street of the old brush pen shop. It had not been used for a few days, but now it was finally put to use. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and took the wet towel from Sang Sang. He sighed and wiped his naked upper body. Listening to the quarrel coming from the bamboo bed next door, he thought that the life of the common people was not as interesting as what scholars said. Since it was boring, he decided to leave. He put the wet towel on his shoulder, got up and said goodbye to his neighbors before returning to his own courtyard. Sang Sang followed him with a bucket in one hand and a bamboo recliner in the other. Today, the little handmaiden was wearing a thin blue floral blouse. How could a tea master guard a tea merchant's house? How could a tea master have a better retirement life than Chen Zixian? In the blink of an eye, Ning Ke thought of many possibilities, even the most impossible one. An unprecedented solemn expression appeared on his childish face outside the mask. He looked at the other party and asked, "Why didn't you escape? Why should I run?" Yan Suqing looked at the teenager with a smile and said, "Since I'm awake, how could you kill me?" After saying this, he gently flicked his sleeves, and a small dark sword without a handle appeared on the stone table. Ning Ke frowned and his body became a little stiff. He knew that he had encountered the most impossible possibility. This weak and frail tea artisan was actually a cultivator. At this moment, he could not help thinking of the conversation he had with Liu Qingchen on the journey. The conversation about sword masters and psyche masters in Chang and city were as numerous as dogs. At that time, Liu Qingchen laughed and said that this argument was absolutely too exaggerated. After entering Chang and city, Ning Ke had seen cultivators from the South School of Haotian Taoism opening altars and casting spells by the roadside, and had fought with cultivators in Spring Breeze Pavilion with Chao Xiaoshu. However, he really did not expect that an inconspicuous name on the revenge list was actually a powerhouse in that world. Neither Zhua Er's information nor Sang Sang noticed it. No one could imagine that the former document appraiser of the military ministry and the tea artisan supported by the tea merchants was actually a cultivator who was proficient in sword riding. Ning Ke's tightly knitted eyebrows slowly relaxed. He looked at Yan Suqing in the chair and the hiltless small sword in front of the emaciated middle-aged man, and said with a gentle smile, "Since you don't want to escape, I will." As soon as he finished his words, he turned around without hesitation and rushed out of the lakeside house like a galloping horse. Yan Suqing looked at the back of the teenager that was about to disappear beside the bamboo wall with great interest. He chuckled and shook his head, saying with emotion, "Since I've come to kill a cultivator, can I still retreat?" The gentle words with strong confidence and killing intent slowly came out from the thin middle-aged man's lips. At the same time, he put down the coarse big teacup in his left hand, rolled up the cuff on his left arm with his right hand, and made a sword formula with the middle and index fingers of his left hand, pointing obliquely to the outside of the lakeside house. His movement was extremely casual and unrestrained. As he pointed obliquely with the middle and index fingers, the dim hiltless small sword on the tea table suddenly hummed in a low voice, as if it was injected with some kind of magical energy. It suddenly bounced up from the table and then turned into a dark trace of light, tearing the darkest night before dawn of the lakeside house and piercing the outside of the courtyard. Ning Ke felt a prickling pain on his back, but there was no panic on his face, which was not covered by the mask. There was only calmness and calmness. Just as he was about to rush out of the sea of bamboos, he unexpectedly stomped on the ground with his left foot. His whole body turned over, and then his right foot stepped on the thick bamboo like lightning. Thump! 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 The solid soles of his shoes stepped on the bamboo rapidly, making the bamboo tree shake for a while, and countless bamboo leaves rustled down like broken feather arrows. He stepped on the bamboo tree and climbed to the courtyard wall in an instant, narrowly avoiding the sword light coming from the courtyard. Then he slightly bent his knees and quickly swept to the courtyard with the help of the vibration of the bamboo tree. With a bang, his body just swept over the courtyard wall like a sharp arrow, and the sharp padao had already been unsheathed in his hand. With a muffled groan, Ning Kei exerted strength in his waist and abdomen, turned over his wrist, and then the padao chopped toward Yan Suching like a snowstorm. Since he knew that this tea specialist was a powerful cultivator, he knew that tonight he would inevitably face a terrible test of life and death again. He knew that his present strength was not enough to fight against a powerful cultivator in the cultivation world, but he still didn't think of retreating, because he knew that retreating in the face of a cultivator meant death. At the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, he saw how Peng Yutao and the most elite bodyguards of the Tang Empire fought with a great sword master with iron and blood, will and discipline. Outside Spring Breeze Pavilion, he saw how Cao Xiaoshu beheaded 2 foreign cultivators with his superb strength and strong control, from which he learned some experience, that was, facing a cultivator, one could only advance and not retreat, and this experience might help him escape death. So at the beginning, his retreat was not retreat, but retreat in order to advance. And then kill. Ding! A clear sound was heard. Ning Kei twisted his body and waved his padao, chopping away the grey sword light that escaped behind him, and then his body fell from the air. For the first time they met, there was a rice grain-sized gap on the edge of the padao and a tiny tear on the top of his shabby robe. However, there was still no fear in his eyebrows and eyes outside the mask. His legs were firmly rooted on the ground like 2 nails, his hands tightly grasping the long hilt of the padao, and he slightly lowered his head to vigilantly observe the movement in the night. All of a sudden, he turned the long padao in his hand and avoided the sword light coming from the right side of the night at the cost of a blood mark on his left shoulder. At the same time, he confirmed from the slight vibration coming from his hand that his blade had at least scratched the flying sword. Ning Kei still slightly lowered his head, quietly staring at Yan Suching sitting in a chair not far away, and carefully listening to the slight buzzing sound in the night around the lakeside house from time to time, trying to determine the position of the flying sword. He took a step forward. A falling bamboo leaf outside the courtyard was torn into 2 halves by an invisible force. He fell backward like a mountain, and the grey shadow of the sword brushed past his shoulder, but it missed its target. He heavily patted the ground with his right hand, tightened his waist and abdomen, and then stood up again like a mountain. His feet moved as fast as lightning, and the grey sword shadow plunged into the crack of the flagstone in front of his feet, and then quickly flew away again with a buzzing sound, disappearing without a trace. He now stood 3 steps back from the previous position. The small oil lamp on the right side of the tea table glowed faintly, and Yan Suching sat in a stone chair with a faint smile. The distance between the two was only a few steps, but it was so difficult to cross this distance in the night. Because no one knew where the grey sword shadow was in the night. Holding the long padao hilt tightly with both hands, Ning Kei steadily stepped on the flagstone without stepping on the crack or the protrusion to ensure that he could borrow all the strength of the earth at any time. Like a statue, Ning Kei stared at the tea artist in the chair, with no fear in his eyes, only calmness and concentration. This was the first time in his life that he fought with a cultivator alone. He knew he had no chance, and he was very likely to meet death tonight, so of course he was afraid. But Ning Kei had been tortured by life and death too many times, so he was very clear that fear was the most useless emotion at this time. Only by turning fear and tension into excitement could he turn life and death around. The flying sword buzzed and stabbed at him like lightning. He waved his pudao to cut it, and even if he missed, he would avoid the vital parts at the last moment by virtue of the fighting instinct honed on the battlefield and his extremely strong body control. Ding! 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 The sword was like flying light, and the pudao was like snow. His body was cut with numerous dense wounds by the sword's shadow, and the blood seeped through his shabby clothes and began to drip on the surface of his body, making him look like a bloody man. But Ning Kai still held the pudao tightly with both hands, and his feet were like nails on the flagstone. On the Vermilion Bird Avenue, which was paved with bluestone, there were countless tiny flowers made of tiny blood drops. From the South City all the way to the north, the blood flowers connected into a line, faintly connecting with the blood at the front of the black umbrella. The place where the blood line was pointing was the stone sculpture of the Vermilion Bird at the far end of the avenue. The Vermilion Bird engraved in the middle of the Imperial Road was deeply carved into the stone. It carried the history of the Tang Empire for more than 1,000 years. No one knew how many high-spirited new kings it had welcomed, and no one knew how many old heroes who ultimately failed to defeat time had been sent away. Its majestic eyes were always so calm and never moved for a moment. At this time, the eyes of the Vermilion Bird were still majestic as usual. However, the right wing of the three indescribably gorgeous top wings on top of its head slowly rose, as if it was going to break through the stone surface and enter the real world. Ning Kai fell unconscious under the big black umbrella. He had no idea that the Vermilion Bird in the distance had undergone such a strange change, nor did he know that a majestic and irresistible sense of destruction that seemed to come from ancient times had enveloped him. His blood flowed between the cracks of the stones, extremely shallow and flat, even shallower and flatter than what humans could imagine. It flowed from the middle of the avenue to the distance, flowing into the complicated and solemn feather stone crevices of the Vermilion Bird in the distance. Silently, the blood that flowed into the beautiful feather stone crevices of the Vermilion Bird Avenue quickly evaporated into a light red mist, and then was quickly purified by an invisible high-temperature power into an invisible void. The blood drops scattered on the bluestone slabs of the Vermilion Bird Avenue also began to evaporate and be purified, disappearing into nothingness one by one. The extremely shallow and flat blood between the stone crevices continued to evaporate and disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye, until finally it came under the big black umbrella and directly invaded Ning Kai's body along with the blood. The invisible scorching aura seemed to be able to incinerate everything in the world. The blood on Ning Kai's body quickly evaporated and disappeared without a trace, but his clothes did not change at all. His arms that were exposed outside his clothes and his cheeks that were exposed outside the mask began to quickly turn red, and the hair on his forehead quickly turned yellow and withered. His fingernails that rested on the bluestone began to become dry and crisp due to the rapid loss of water. A green leaf was blown up by the morning wind and fell on the back of his hand. Then it was brushed off again, still green and pleasing. An ant was disturbed by the fallen leaves and climbed up the back of his hand, and then climbed down from the other side, still alive. But if nothing unexpected happened, Ning Kai would be burned alive by the mysterious invisible flame released by the Vermilion Bird in the next moment. At this moment, a shadow descended and crushed the pitiful ant to death with a light smack. The big black umbrella, blown by the morning wind, gently covered Ning Kei's body, gently swaying like a black lotus. With the swaying of the black umbrella, the green leaf was instantly frozen into ice and scattered into countless tiny pieces of ice when the morning wind gently brushed it. An absolutely cold aura was gradually released from the black umbrella, slowly and unstoppably seeping into Ning Kei's hot body. After a moment, the redness on his cheeks and arms gradually faded and became snow-white after a serious injury. The hair on his forehead quickly became black and glossy, and the fingernails on his hands that rested on the bluestone regained their luster. The vermilion bird on the stone street in the distance seemed to sense something. Its majestic and solemn eyes were obviously calm as usual, but it gave people a feeling that it was looking in the direction where Ning Kei was lying down. After a moment, the three indescribably gorgeous top wings on its head all rose up. Almost at the same time, the big black umbrella covering Ning Kei's body swayed even faster. The black wind was blowing in the black wilderness. The strong wind rolled up the black gravel and scattered it everywhere in the sky, so that it seemed that the light of the scorching sun in the sky had turned black. There was a black snow mountain in the distance of the wilderness, which was constantly melting and collapsing under the illumination of the black scorching sun. The melted snow water mixed with the black soil and gravel, reflecting the black sunlight and rushing around violently. The black snow mountain was about to collapse, and the flood it formed was about to destroy the whole world. But at this moment, the bright night suddenly came to the world, releasing an incomparably warm and cold aura. Ning Kei stood at a certain point in this space, looking at the magnificent scene of destruction in front of him with confusion and incomparable calmness. He did not know where this place was, but he knew that this was not a dream. This feeling was clear and firm, just as he clearly saw the light occupying most of the sky, but he was sure that it was night. The bright night covered most of the sky, blocking the blazing black sunlight and gradually slowing down the melting of the snow mountain. And the cold aura emitted from the bright night sky began to condense the raging flood in the black wilderness, turning it into dancing black ice and unwilling black snow. The whole world was reshaping, and the black snow mountain slowly and unstoppably stood up again. The world returned to peace, and the night returned to the color that night should have. The glaciers and snow rivers in the wilderness disappeared, as if nothing had changed, but also as if everything had changed. The sun in the sky warmly shone on the world, and the spring light melted the snow on the other side of the snow mountain. The gurgling water seeped into the depths of the snow, fell into the blue and dark underground ice cave, and then disappeared. After an unknown number of years, in a place far away from the snowy mountains in the wilderness, a pebble gently trembled and was pushed to the side. Then, a trickle of water gushed out and gradually spread out, flowing towards the horizon. On the bank of the river, there was a weak but strong blade of grass. Damn, this chapter seems to take 6 hours. I can only vomit blood and accept it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. I think I caught a cold. The coachman turned around and held the reins with one hand and gently waved the whip with the other. He said with a smile, "Heat is the most troublesome. But you're young and vigorous. You'll be fine after drinking some cooling tea when you get back to the shop." Hearing the word vigorous, Ning Kei did not know why his heart palpitated. He was slightly startled and looked down at his sleeve. He found that it was stained with 2 smears of blood that he coughed up, so he gently held the corner of the sleeve in his hand. The southern city of Chang'an was a noble place, and the lakeside house was even more noble. People who were qualified to live in such a place were either rich or noble. Although Yan Suqing, the tea master, was not allowed in the imperial court, he still had some fame in the upper circle of celebrities. The previous deadly fight in the lakeside house had already alarmed other lakeside residents. When they found that Yan Suqing, the tea master, was beheaded, the Chang and local government and even the Yulin royal guards immediately began a serious investigation. At this time, the city gate had just opened, which was a good time to block the murderer in the city. The local government runners of the Chang and local government inquired everywhere, the Yulin royal guards guarded the streets, and the inspection at the city gate was extremely strict. But no matter how strict the inspection was, there were still some differences. At least for the carriage with the logo of the academy, which was responsible for sending students to study in the academy, the solemn city gate guard just casually asked a few questions, and then lifted the curtain to take a look, and then waved his hand to let go. Ning Ke lifted the curtain and looked at the whole of the city gate, thinking that if the bloodstains on his body had not been completely annihilated, it would have been really difficult for him to pass today. At this time, he did not know that the bloodstains on the Vermilion Bird Avenue had also been completely evaporated and purified, leaving no trace. Otherwise, the cavalrymen of the Yulin Royal Guards would have already followed the bloodstains to catch up with him, who was exhausted and seriously injured. With the sound of hooves and wheels, the first ray of morning light fell on Chang and city, shining on the young boy's innocent cheeks, which made his pale face even paler. He could not help but squint his eyes, thinking of the black sunshine in that world and the many puzzling things that happened to him tonight. He subconsciously shook his head, and then hid the knife under the board of the carriage. When the carriage arrived at the academy, Ning Ke slowly and calmly walked into the academy. The stone path, which used to be lush with flowers and grass, seemed so long today, and every step was so painful. Chapter 113. Although the people of the Tang Empire were ferocious, Chang'an was the most benevolent city. Numerous imperial courts, government offices, and military camps were scattered in the city. High officials and nobles lived in the city, so the security was very good. Except for a few corpses in a duel of life and death, there were very few cases of abnormal deaths in Chang'an. Of course, the murder at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, which was approved by His Majesty in the palace, was not included. Therefore, when the murder happened at the lakeside in the southern city, the Chang and local government suddenly became nervous in the morning. The new judicial military adjunct and the coroner squatted in the autopsy room and did not dare to go out. The head on duty led more than 100 government runners to run between the streets, sweating profusely. The current magistrate of Chang'an, Shengguan Yangyu, who had just gotten up, looked extremely gloomy. "Your Honor, the murderer must be an experienced killer. We searched around the murder scene but found no clues. We only found a piece of clothing in the side alley of the Vermilion Bird Avenue. I guess it was left by the murderer." The criminal official in charge of investigating major and important cases respectfully handed over the tattered coat and another piece of cloth in his hand, saying, "It's not that my subordinates are incompetent, the Yulin Royal Guards have also lost them." Shengguan Yangyu took the ragged coat and then looked at the piece of cloth against the morning light coming in from outside the hall. His triangular eyes shrunk so much that they almost turned into 2 soybeans, but he couldn't find anything. He said in a hoarse voice, "Ask the old man to check this coat. If he can't find any clues about the material, then focus on the needlework. This is a ready-made garment from the lawn embroidery workshop." Someone had knocked on the door and asked. This ready-made garment of this style and size was produced a few years ago and sold many pieces. This one is obviously old, so. The subordinate looked up at the expression on his honor's face and said carefully, "Neither the needlework or the material of the garment can be checked." Shengguan Yangyu gently stroked his sparse beard and said indifferently without any expression on his face, "The imperial court keeps us officials to do things. If it's not easy to check, shouldn't we?" After hesitating for a moment, the subordinate came forward and said in a low voice, "Sir, the coat left behind by the murderer has been cut countless times by the blade of the sword, but there is no trace of blood on it. According to this subordinate's judgment, there are only two possibilities. Say it. Shengguan Yuyang said angrily, annoyed at his slowness. The first possibility is that the murderer is wearing a very expensive soft armor, but look at the rips on the clothes, especially the places where the rips are. But he knew that if this murder case involved a lot of people, it was not a problem that could be solved by the Chang and local government alone. If other departments did not take action, it meant that someone in the imperial court did not want to make trouble. His Majesty is very benevolent. He cupped his hands in front and bowed respectfully to the far north. His ugly face was full of gratitude. His Majesty has promoted me from the judicial military staff to the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City. How dare I make trouble for His Majesty? There was an old tower made of yellow bricks in the southern city. The tower was badly damaged and entangled with green vines. It seemed that it would collapse at any time. However, after so many years, the old tower still stood among the small temples. It was silent and peaceful, watching others build tall buildings, and others build brothels. Every spring, countless wild geese returned from the south. Before the geese went to Xuanyang Lake in Gushan Commandery to spend the summer, they would fly over Chang'an City and circle around the old tower for many days. At that time, the shadows of the geese would cover the sky and the birds would sing. It was a spectacular scene. No one knew why these wild geese, who flew high in the sky and slept by the water, would appear in the bustling Chang'an City and be so interested in the old tower. But after a long time, they got used to it. In recent years, the scene of tens of thousands of flying geese had become another wonderful scene for the people of Chang'an to enjoy the spring. And the old tower also had a name, Wanyan Tower. Today, there was a monk living at the top of the Wanyan Tower, accompanied by the lamp and the Buddha statue in the shrine and the scriptures on the table. He rarely went down from the tower and rarely met the good Zen women in the back garden. This monk called himself Huang Yang, the younger brother of the Tang Empire's emperor. Today, he welcomed a guest who was equally distinguished. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, looked at the monk who was copying scriptures at the table and said, "Last night, the vermilion bird woke up." Monk Huang Yang replied calmly without raising his head, "The divine object left by the previous generation of sages has its own meaning. How can it be known to us ordinary people who are still trapped in the world of mortals? Brother Qingshan, why bother yourself? I have to finish a chapter. Otherwise, this writing method, with 3 chapters and each chapter is painstakingly written, will kill me. Besides, this chapter only has 2,000 words. That's because the last chapter yesterday had 4,000 words. So, I'm not cheating, right? Tonight, I'll try my best to finish it as soon as possible. I'll bow and spit out blood. The blood on your shoes. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.